Tonight at 10, after weeks of delay, the government has approved the building of a new nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point in Somerset. At a cost of £18 billion, supporters say it's vital to the country's energy future.
It will provide 7% of the UK's electricity needs, giving secure energy to 6 million homes for 60 years.
France and, controversially, China are providing the money for Hinkley C, with Beijing clear to build another nuclear plant in Essex.
The government has primary responsibility to safeguard our national security, but neither the Secretary of State nor the Prime Minister have ever been clear about what they consider to be the security risks.
The government says safeguards are in place to protect Britain's national interests. We'll be analysing whether the Hinkley deal is a good one for consumers. Also tonight.
Full downstairs with over a ward of patients. We need to get those patients moved as soon as possible.
How the crisis in social care in England has led to a massive rise in those unable to leave hospital. We speak to one patient who's been waiting 72 days to go home.
I have to say it's great to be back on the campaign trail.
Hillary Clinton resumes her run for the White House after a bout of pneumonia. The government says the BBC must reveal the names of any staff earning more than £150,000 as part of the renewal of the corporation's royal charter. And the journey of one Syrian refugee, how this 15-year-old is building a new life in Germany.
In the south, a fishing trip in the Caribbean goes disastrously wrong for two friends from Portsmouth, a 7-hour wait to be rescued. And the Happiness app, helping teenage mental health.
Good evening. Britain is to get its first new nuclear power plant in 20 years. The government has finalised a deal for the building of Hinkley C in Somerset with the French company EDF and billions of pounds of investment from China. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, was expected to agree the deal 2 months ago, but ordered a review on security and financial grounds. The government says it will now impose safeguards for future foreign investment in infrastructure projects. But Labour says the measures are window dressing. Here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
Were they really going to stop the engines, drive the diggers away, and give up on years of preparation, chuck away millions already spent?
Statement, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy.
Ministers did pause, but are now pressing go.
Hinkley unleashes a long overdue new wave of investment in nuclear engineering in the UK, creating 26,000 jobs and apprenticeships, providing a huge boost to the economy.
Under the £18 billion deal, the new Hinkley reactor should be running by 2025. The Chinese plan to build another new nuclear plant at Bradwell in Essex. The government will take a special share in that and any future projects. That will give them some more control over important infrastructure being bought or sold. The deal was first signed last year, amid a welcome for the Chinese leader that could hardly have been more lavish. There were nerves around Westminster about the huge cost, security and the environment. But Chinese involvement in new nuclear projects was applauded at the top. But with a change of the boss, a change of heart. And to Chinese fury, one of Theresa May's first acts was to delay the decision, to pore over the details again.
And commented on its beauty.
Brave or foolhardy?
Mr. Speaker, the government created a commercial crisis. They sent shockwaves through the industry and unions alike. They risked a diplomatic dispute with one of our key future trading partners. And in the end, all they've done is pretend to give themselves powers which they already possessed.
Ministers say there'll be an important new framework to check up on all big projects. The hope, Hinkley will help keep the lights on at Big Ben and everywhere else. The risk is controversial and expensive. So what was the delay about? When Theresa May moved into number 10, the National Security Council had already reviewed the deal. The terms had already been agreed. And those close at that stage tell me there's no fundamental difference between now and then. But imagine she had gone ahead straight away. The brand new Prime Minister would have been waving through one of the most controversial deals in history, barely a fortnight into the job.
There's no difference besides the special share. And one has to wonder that Britain's paid a very high diplomatic price and potentially a price in terms of high cost of investment. Was it worth it?
Now there's official go-ahead, the next stage on the ground can start. But no project like this has been completed before. All the fuss, all the political hopes for Hinkley could yet turn to dust. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the boss of the French energy firm EDF, which will build the new plant, says the deal is a big boost for the UK and great news for customers. But will consumers benefit? Here's our business editor, Simon Jack.
Off the drawing board and into reality. Today was heralded as the renaissance of UK nuclear, but in truth it's been a protracted and difficult rebirth, but one to be celebrated, according to its proud French parent.
It's great news for the customers, it's a big boost for the UK industry, it's a great step in the fight against climate change.
It's not just good news for the French builders and their Chinese partners. The benefits of this project will be felt in the economy locally and nationally.
We're really pleased that the jobs which were promised, over 25,000 over its lifetime, 500 new apprentices, and of course plenty of jobs within the supply chain.
But this is no simple undertaking. Similar projects in France and Finland have run billions over budget and years over schedule. Risks the builders will bear in return for potentially large rewards when built. The government clearly feels the political and economic case has been made, but does that make it in itself a good idea? Is it value for money? Now, if it's delivered on budget, it will cost that figure of £18 billion, you've heard, making it the most expensive power plant in history. Now, the good news is that EDF and their Chinese partners are paying that cost up front, but only because the government has agreed to guarantee them a price of £92.50 per unit of that electricity for 35 years. That compares to the current price of just £43. Now, depending on the electricity price at any one time, that equates to a subsidy of between £10 and £20 per household per year added to energy bills. And when complete, it will contribute 7% of the UK's total electricity needs. But that is not enough to convince the project's many critics.
Well, what we really need to be doing right now is investing in the renewables, in wind, which is already available, offshore wind, cheaper than Hinkley will be. We need to invest in solar so that people can have this on the roofs of their houses, put that together with batteries, and they could be getting revenues as well as bills.
But when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you have a problem, which can lead to shortfalls like yesterday, when a sudden demand surge saw prices rocket to twice the cost of electricity produced by Hinkley.
The UK energy price spike has drawn attention to how narrow our supply margin actually is at the moment, and that's the reason behind the government's thinking for the capacity markets and also subsidising Hinkley.
If you thought Hinkley was controversial, wait for what's coming soon. China expects to be rewarded for its support of this project with a contract to design, build and operate its very own reactor on British soil. Simon Jack, BBC News.
It's thought the Chinese will submit plans to build that new plant at Bradwell in Essex within weeks, but some have questioned whether Beijing should be allowed to play such a big role in a critical part of UK infrastructure, even with government safeguards. Here's our China editor, Carrie Gracie.
For China, today is less about Hinkley Point and more about Bradwell. The go-ahead for the Somerset plant embeds China in future UK energy plans and means that a state-owned Chinese company will be building critical national infrastructure here in Essex.
This is the first reactor. This is the first reactor.
The Chinese side would say it's been a long time coming. 3 years ago, an eager chancellor was impressed by the scale and speed of China's nuclear rollout and soon invited Beijing to invest and bid for contracts in the UK.
The state-owned enterprises want to use this deal as a stepping stone to achieve major foothold in the European market, and obviously to get into advanced sectors like civil nuclear is a major success for the Chinese state-owned enterprise, I would say.
China will now begin the long process of getting its nuclear reactor approved in the UK, and then it'll build it here in Essex. It wants Bradwell to be its nuclear showcase to the world. And with this deal, the UK is forging closer ties with China just at the moment when other major Western powers are becoming more cautious in their dealings with Beijing. The United States, for example. Diplomatic niceties aside, Washington has accused the UK's new Chinese partner of stealing US nuclear technology. And Australia's just rejected a Chinese infrastructure bid on national security grounds. Britain's now committed to going much further than its allies and neighbours to secure Chinese investment.
Of course, there are all kinds of questions when you're dealing with the Chinese. I know Westinghouse here in the United States worked with the Chinese, and as a result, every scrap of information, every iota of technical information on all of their designs it's gone, went to China.
Bradwell, the symbol of mutual trust between Beijing and London. They'll now want to put a bruising 7 weeks behind them and get back to the language of win-win deals to come. Expect talk of a free trade deal for a post-Brexit British economy and a Chinese role in another piece of key UK infrastructure, high-speed rail. Carrie Gracie, BBC News, Bradwell in Essex.
Well, our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, is here. Laura, the government took close to, 2 months to review this deal? Was it ever really in doubt?
Well, I think it didn't feel like it was inevitable when the Prime Minister slammed the brakes on at the end of July. That was a shock to a lot of people, especially after the really visible enthusiasm of the previous administration. But when you talk to Theresa May's team, they're deadly serious about this. They say they were quite surprised that the checks on this deal, the checks and balances, hadn't been more thorough, those that had been put in place. And I think that they were very clear. Theresa May was not going to be rushed. She very determinedly wanted to look at this again and take her time over it. But when you look at the big picture, to back out would have been a really serious 2 fingers up, not just to the Chinese, but also to France, at a time when the UK needs friends because we're just embarking on the process of leaving the EU. It would have been a real alarm bell for the business community from a new government. Not necessarily because there aren't alternatives, but it was a question of trust. This deal had already been agreed. And, you know, politically, to tear up this part of David Cameron and George Osborne's legacy would have been an enormous political statement for the new Prime Minister, who, after all, sat around the same cabinet table as them. So maybe it wasn't quite inevitable, but I do think that the government was looking for a way to make this happen rather than for looking for a way out.
Sure. OK, Laura, many thanks for that. Laura Koonsberg there. Now, the shocking impact on the health service in England of a crisis in social care provision has been laid bare today. New figures show a rapid rise in the numbers of people unable to leave hospital because of problems providing them with care at home. It's costing the NHS £820 million a year and putting hospitals under huge strain, as our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt has been finding out in Liverpool. And a word of warning, there are some flashing images in her report.
It's 9 o'clock in the morning and the Royal Liverpool Hospital is under pressure again. In accident and emergency, patients needing immediate treatment keep on arriving. Many are elderly.
At the minute, the A&E department is full.
Each of these red dots represents someone who has been waiting for more than 4 hours, breaching government targets. One patient has been here 18 hours, ready to be moved to a ward.
There's no capacity. We are actually overflowing in A&E, so there is a problem. Ambulances will be queuing up.
You must be really frustrated with that.
Yes, to be honest with you.
Rather full downstairs with over a ward of patients. We need to get those patients moved as soon as possible.
Upstairs, senior staff are trying to free up beds for the new patients needing operations or emergency treatment.
There's no trolley space in resus. We have 2 patients waiting in the corridor at the moment.
Have we got any patients identified that can move?
Yeah, there's about 3 or 4 in there that could move out, but we've got nowhere obviously in the department to move them out to. So.
They have more than 100 patients who are ready to leave hospital but can't because of delays in getting home care, residential care or community nursing.
This is happening almost every day. Surgery can't start this morning until we've identified a bed for somebody to then return to after theatre.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Oh, not too bad, right? 86-year-old Derek Chin is one of the patients who will go home during the day. He's been on the specialist stroke ward whilst waiting for extra home care to be organised. This was the only bed available to doctors, even though he had a fall, not a stroke.
Essentially, it's a very expensive residential home bed. He isn't the problem, it's our system preventing us from discharging people appropriately, which means that the acute patients who really do have a need for these beds are being delayed downstairs in the accident and emergency department.
On another ward, Camille Fennell has been waiting 72 days to leave the hospital, but the council is struggling to find a care provider that can support her at home 4 times a day.
They should do more to get people back into the community.
And you're still waiting?
I'm still waiting, yeah. I'm a very independent person.
So you don't really want to be here, do you?
No, not really, no.
An increasing number of hospitals in England face these pressures.
More and more cuts are expected from us.
In Liverpool, the man who runs the council's social care says they are struggling with budget cuts and staff shortages.
We are seeing more people with high demands in terms of their health and their well-being. People are living longer, which is great, we celebrate it, but we don't have the services out there to cope with that number.
This sounds like a system at breaking point.
It is, and that's what keeps me awake at night.
The government says it's making significantly more money available to social care to ensure affordable, dignified support. It's 5 o'clock and back in A&E at the Royal, there is no let-up in patients needing help. At this point, they don't want us filming inside. For a short period of time, they had to divert ambulances to neighbouring hospitals. They've got 9 people on trolleys in the corridors, and there are no resuscitation beds available at the moment. Upstairs at the latest operations meeting, the implications of that are clear. The emergency department is now on the highest level of alert.
A&E were on the verge of being unsafe.
It means as they head into the evening, they will begin the search for people who can be sent home safely all over again. Alison Holt, BBC News, Liverpool.
And you can find out the cost of care in your area, wherever you live in the UK, by using the BBC's online guide. Just enter your postcode, local council name or Northern Ireland Health Board and discover the cost of an hour of home care and information about residential and nursing home fees. It's all there for you. Let's take a brief look at some of the day's other top stories now. And police are investigating the deaths of a woman and her nephew in London who were shot this morning. They died at a flat in East Finchley. The family of the victims, named locally as Annie Ikofo, who was 52, and her nephew Burville, may have been the victims of mistaken identity. 5 police officers face possible dismissal over the way they dealt with a man who'd broken his neck following an incident outside a nightclub in Bedford 3 years ago. Julian Cole, who's 23, suffered severe brain damage and was left paralysed. Prosecutors are deciding whether to go to court following an investigation by the police watchdog, the IPCC. Now, the Bank of England says the short-term economic impact of Brexit isn't as bad as first feared. It's predicting growth for the third quarter of this year will be higher than expected. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, is in the city for us tonight. Kamal, this seems to mark a significant change in tone on the part of the Bank of England.
I think you're absolutely right, Clive. The Bank of England, a definite change of tone from the rather gloomy assessment it made post the referendum vote in August. It's responding to a whole list of new figures which really show that the impact of the vote is not as bad as expected. Employment figures are strong, consumer confidence is up, house prices haven't collapsed, retail sales today, very strong figures there. Why is the economy feeling stronger? I think there are a number of reasons. Of course, after the referendum, the bank cut interest rates to record lows, and that boosted economic confidence. I think that, of course, we are still in the European Union, paradoxically, with a weaker currency. Nothing better than being in a free trade zone with a weak currency. Very good for exports, and that, again, is another boost for the economy. There's a degree of political stability and certainly warm noises from the UK government about wanting a good trade deal with the European Union. That settled some business fears. Is this confidence going to continue into 2017? Now there the bank is much more cautious. It says there has not been enough data and there is some evidence of inflation pressure growing. Imports of fuel and of food are more expensive. It is keeping in its back pocket the opportunity or the decision to reduce interest rates again if that economic data takes a turn for the worst.
OK, Kamal, thank you for that. Kamal Ahmed there at the Bank of England. Now, Hillary Clinton is back campaigning tonight in her run for the White House after collapsing at a 9/11 memorial event with pneumonia. The Democratic candidate told supporters it was great to be back. Meanwhile, her Republican rival, Donald Trump, has released details of his health, as our North America editor, John Sopel, reports.
Hillary Clinton is up and running again, well, standing and walking at least, and that's big progress on last Sunday when she collapsed at a 9/11 memorial. It was later revealed she was suffering from pneumonia. And first campaign stop, Greensboro, North Carolina. And to the strains of I Feel Good, she took to the stage.
I have to say it's great to be back on the campaign trail. As you may know, I recently had a cough that turned out to be pneumonia. I tried to power through it, but even I had to admit that maybe a few days of rest would do me good.
And her supporters, it seemed, couldn't have been less bothered about her health.
The only thing I worry about is that she may be working too hard. She is a dynamo. People get sick. I do not worry about her health at all.
Are you concerned about her health?
No, not at all.
Why not?
Well, same age as I am. She's in good health. She's running a hard race, and she got a cold. Got turned into pneumonia. Easy to do.
I think she's a great example for all women, and especially for young women who want to get into politics like me. And women every day push through and work through sickness, and she's just a great example.
Today, Donald Trump's physician released a letter with some of his medical history and most recent test results. The conclusion, Mr. Trump is in excellent physical health. And last night in Ohio, he appeared magnanimous to his rival.
And in all fairness, she's lying in bed, getting better, and we want her better. We want her back on the trail, right? We want her back on the trail.
But as you might expect, there were limits to that magnanimity.
I don't know, folks. You think Hillary would be able to stand up here for an hour and do this? I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, Hillary Clinton has not been on stage for an hour, but she's come through this unscathed. There's 54 days to polling, and next stop are the presidential debates. And she has got her work cut out, because the person with all the momentum at the moment is Donald Trump. John Sopel, BBC News, Greensboro, North Carolina.
The UN has made a fresh appeal to President Assad to allow aid convoys into the northern city of Aleppo, where nearly 300,000 people are said to be in desperate need. Many more have fled the fighting there, which has been going on for 4 years, and among them, 16-year-old Nujeen Mustafa, in a wheelchair, made the perilous journey to Europe. Our special correspondent, Fergal Keane, met her exactly a year ago at a border crossing in Hungary. She's now settled in Germany, and she's been back to meet her.
2,000 miles from Aleppo and the war, Nujeen Mustafa has a new life. On her way to school, speaking fluent German, embracing the normal. This is Nujeen a year after arriving on European shores. It was a journey made by thousands, but for a girl in a wheelchair, the challenges were an adventure.
You should fight to get what you want in this world, so
Yes, it's a journey for a new life.
Age 16, she taught herself English by watching soap operas and came to Europe with big dreams.
I love to be an astronaut, to go out and see and find an alien. Yes, I want to meet the Queen. Yes.
Nujine's journey has crossed the borders of nations and of the imagination. From detention in Central Europe.
I was afraid, but I'm doing okay. As I said, I'm stronger than I look.
To freedom in Germany today.
What's changed?
The new Nujine is just like any other person. She wakes up early, she goes to school. She is a hardworking pupil, I hope. She speaks German. And she's safe. She's not afraid anymore.
But this is not a story with an uncomplicated, happy ending. Resentment of migration is growing in Germany. In Cologne, young migrant men were blamed for a wave of sexual assaults on New Year's Eve. With over 1 million migrants and refugees arriving in the last year, the far right has gained politically. It would refuse entry to people like Nujine.
The refugee policies of Angela Merkel were wrong from the beginning. I would have catered for, let's say, Syrians in the region, in Lebanon and in Jordania or in Turkey. That would have been cheaper and you would have been able to help a lot more people.
But like many Syrians, Nujine longs for home. Here she is in Aleppo before the war. And this is her city now. She wanted to send a message to Syria.
Hello, my home. I really miss you. But don't worry, you're just really, really, really sick. But I'm sure you're gonna get better. And when you do, I'll be right by your side. I'll be right back. Promise.
Fergal Keane, BBC News, Cologne.
The BBC is being asked to name all its presenters and staff who earn more than £150,000 a year. It's part of the renewal of the corporation's Royal Charter, the document which sets out how it should be run for the next 11 years. Our home editor Mark Easton's report contains some flashing images.
Fascination with celebrities, what people earn, and a demand for accountability have combined to open the seal on pay packets at the BBC. There are top names like Gary Lineker, chat show host Graham Norton, and Strictly stars like Claudia Winkleman, who are said to pocket hundreds of thousands a year. But now, after a change of government thinking, scores of journalists and presenters will have their salaries published too.
We love to hear about celebrities and their money, but Theresa May, who's long had a reputation for demanding transparency in public life, is insisting that everyone at the BBC who earns more than £150,000 a year should be named. The new government says the public has a right to know.
My concern is that these proposals won't help. They're not in the best interests of our audiences. We operate in a highly competitive market, as was reinforced just this week, and this will make it harder for us.
Programmes like The Great British Bake Off, just acquired by Channel 4, which outbid the BBC, will be even more difficult for the corporation to hold on to, it's suggested. The government, though, says the new charter protects quality output.
The BBC is one of this country's greatest achievements and greatest treasures. These reforms ensure that it will continue to be cherished at home and abroad for many years to come.
There's a TV set on number 5.
The licence fee, a part of British life since the 1920s,
and they're watching Columbo,
will now survive until its 100th birthday.
It won't take us long to find you.
The biggest change is to the way the BBC is governed. The independent BBC Trust is abolished and replaced by a new BBC Unitary Board of 14 people, 5, including the chair, appointed by the government, 5 independent appointees and 4 BBC executives.
The government don't want to be seen to running the BBC, in controlling the media, but they do want their hands around the BBC's neck every now and again, just because they can't resist it.
There may be anxieties about independence and salaries, but many in broadcasting would probably agree the new charter is largely a BBC continuity announcement. Mark Easton, BBC News, Broadcasting House.
It's been another triumphant day for Britain's Paralympians in Rio, with golds for canoeists Jeanette Chippington, Emma Wiggs and Anne Dickens. There was also victory in equestrian events, as British athletes passed the 100 medal mark, with 49 of them being gold. With all of today's action, here's our sports correspondent, Andy Swiss.
Proof that the best things really do come to those who wait. 20 years ago, Jeanette Chippington was winning Paralympic gold as a swimmer before she retired and became an instructor. But now in her 40s, a comeback as a canoeist produced a thrilling result.
Has the gold by the narrowest of margins.
Afterwards, she admitted she'd never set out to achieve anything like this.
I said right from the start, I don't want to get into elite sport again, because it takes over your whole life. And then before I knew it, I was training twice a day, every day, and 4 years later, here I am with a gold medal.
For the British fans at the lake, it was the start of a magical hour. Next, victory for an ecstatic Emma Wiggs, before Anne Dickens completed a golden hat-trick. Dickens was a volunteer at London 2012, from Games maker to Games winner. At the dressage, meanwhile, yet more celebrations for one of the British team's greatest talents. Sophie Christensen, who has cerebral palsy, winning another Paralympic gold with another near-flawless display. And in second, what a story, 67-year-old Anne Dunham, Britain's oldest competitor here, taking silver. There was also gold for Natasha Baker, performing for the final time on Cabral, the horse she calls her soulmate. Another title for her, and a highly emotional one. Elsewhere, in the doubles final of the wheelchair tennis, Gordon Reid and Alfie Hewitt are battling for gold, but they'll have to do it the hard way after losing the first set.
Yes, that tennis final still going on, but there has been disappointment in the athletics for wheelchair racer David Weir. He could only finish 6th in the 800 metres, and afterwards he announced that he will retire after the London Marathon next year, Clive.
Andy, many thanks for that. Andy Swiss there in Rio. And just before we go, while we've been on air, the winner of the 2016 Mercury Music Prize has been announced. It went to the grime artist Skepta.
Rest in peace, David Bowie. Rest in peace, Amy Winehouse. I don't know why man's calling me family all of a sudden. Like, my mum don't know your mum. Stop telling man you're my cousin. I got day ones.
The London musician's 4th album, Konnichiwa, only released in May, beat David Bowie's Black Star, which had been the bookie's favourite. Newsnight is on BBC Two with more on the Hinkley Point nuclear deal, but that's it from us. Now it's time for the news where you are. Have a very good night.